For more than a decade now, one single event has haunted the world of aviation more than any other: the complete and total disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. So today, we're going to walk through the evidence to really understand what we know, what we think we know, and why it remains one of the most profound mysteries of our time.
Just think about that for a second. It's a fact that's almost impossible to wrap your head around. On a totally routine flight, a modern Boeing 777, one of the safest planes ever made, and every single person on board just vanished. No distress call, no wreckage, no explanation.
And that right there is the one question that has launched one of the biggest, most expensive search efforts in human history. How, in our modern age of constant surveillance and satellite tracking, could something that big just disappear off the face of the Earth?
The night began just like any other. The flight took off right on time, climbed up to its cruising altitude, and everything was perfectly normal. At 1:19 in the morning, the crew made their final calm radio call to Malaysian Air Traffic Control, and just 2 minutes later, its little icon on the radar screen just blinked out. Gone.
So how does a plane just go dark like that? Well, the answer comes down to a little device called a transponder. You can think of it as the plane's electronic signature, constantly pinging air traffic controllers saying, "Hey, here I am, here's my speed, here's my altitude." For MH370 to disappear from those screens, someone had to have turned it off.
And what's so critical here is the timing. The transponder went dark at the exact moment the plane was being handed over from Malaysian control to Vietnamese control. So Malaysia thought Vietnam had it. Vietnam was just waiting for it to check in. For 18 critical minutes in this digital no man's land, nobody was actually looking for it.
Initially, the search was all focused on the South China Sea, right where the plane was last seen. But then, days into the search, the entire investigation got turned completely on its head, thanks to a bombshell revelation from the Malaysian military.
So while the civilian radar, the one that relies on the transponder, lost the plane, military, primary radar, which basically works like a simple echo, bouncing a signal off objects, had tracked an unidentified blip making a sharp, deliberate U-turn. It flew back across Malaysia and then headed out of range. That blip, it turned out, was MH370. They had been searching in the completely wrong ocean.
And get this wasn't some ghost flight flying erratically. The military radar data showed the plane making these constant, tiny course corrections, the kind you see when a plane is being flown by hand. It even made a precise turn to skirt around a sensitive Thai military zone and carefully maneuvered around two other planes in the sky. Someone was absolutely in control.
So the military radar track went cold, leaving another vast stretch of ocean to search. The next huge breakthrough came from a place nobody expected: a communications satellite floating way up in geostationary orbit.
Okay, so here's what happened. After the transponder went off, the plane's satellite unit also got powered down. But about an hour later, it mysteriously rebooted itself and started sending these hourly automated hello signals, or pings, to an Inmarsat satellite. Now, engineers couldn't see where the plane was, but by measuring the time it took that signal to travel, they could calculate its distance from the satellite. This created a series of giant arcs on the map, like digital breadcrumbs, showing where the plane was at the top of each hour for 6 more hours.
And that final, 7th arc, that was the golden clue. It was the last handshake the satellite ever received. It placed the aircraft's final moments somewhere along this massive line, deep in one of the most remote, treacherous parts of the entire planet: the southern Indian Ocean. The plane had just kept flying for hours and hours until it simply ran out of fuel. So with a probable location, or at least a probable search area, established, the investigation shifted from where the plane went to the most disturbing questions of all: who flew it there and why?
Naturally, all attention immediately focused on the two men in the cockpit. First, you had the first officer, Farid Ahmed, a young pilot who was actually on his final training flight. Investigators dug into his life and found absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. But the investigation into the captain, Zahari Shah, a highly experienced senior pilot, started to reveal some unsettling clues.
Now, it is so important to say that this is all circumstantial evidence, but the pieces did start to form a compelling, though still unproven, theory. Investigators discovered a deleted flight path on his home flight simulator that ended way out in the southern Indian Ocean, eerily similar to the plane's presumed route. They also learned he was a distant relative of a Malaysian opposition leader who had been controversially jailed just hours before the flight. And of course, as the senior captain, he had total authority to send his junior co-pilot out of the cockpit for any reason.
You can just imagine the chill in the room when forensics experts restored that deleted data from his simulator. They saw that long southern path ending in the middle of nowhere, and it became this chilling centerpiece to the leading theory. One investigator reportedly just looked at it and asked, "Does this look familiar?"
So if we follow this theory, how could one person have actually pulled all of this off? Well, investigators pieced together a possible and frankly terrifyingly methodical sequence of events that could have happened inside that locked cockpit.
All right, here's how this scenario goes. First, the hijacker gets the co-pilot to leave the cockpit and immediately locks the door. Then, at that perfect handover point, Igari, the transponder, is switched off. After that, main power is cut, which not only disables the satellite comms without sending an alert, but it also kicks off the autopilot, which would explain that period of manual flight. Once the plane is clear of military radar, power is restored, that reboots the satellite unit, which triggers that first ping we talked about, and it allows the autopilot to be programmed for that final long flight south into oblivion.
This chilling scenario leads us to the plane's final hours, just flying silently on autopilot over an empty ocean, and the unbelievable challenge that came next. After flying for about 7.5 hours, the plane would have finally run out of fuel. Boeing simulations suggest the right engine would flame out first, causing the autopilot to bank the plane hard to the left. Just a few minutes later, the left engine would die, and the plane would have started its final spiraling descent, hitting the ocean somewhere near that seventh arc.
To really understand why finding the wreckage is so difficult, just compare it to Air France 447, which also crashed in a deep part of the ocean. In that case, they had a known flight path, and they found debris within 5 days. And it still took them 2 years to find the main wreckage. With MH370, they had a gigantic, unknown search area and absolutely no initial debris. The scale of the challenge is just staggering.
Pieces of the plane did eventually start washing up, thousands of miles away on the shores of Africa, carried by ocean currents. These fragments, like the famous flaperon found on Reunion Island, proved the plane did end its flight in the Indian Ocean, but they haven't been enough to help pinpoint where the main wreckage lies on the seafloor. And that leaves us right here. The data strongly points to a deliberate act. The debris confirms a tragic end, but the wreckage, the black boxes, and the final definitive answers, they all remain lost in the crushing depths of the ocean. For the families of the 239 people on board, the question is still the same. What will it finally take to solve this mystery and bring them home?